What do you think is the most racist film Disney has ever put out? A lot of people are going to answer that question with Song of the South, and that is the more famous answer, but it's incorrect. There are more famous movies that are more racist that Disney put out. For example, Peter Pan, I think, is substantially more racist than Song of the South is, but there is a very forgotten movie that doesn't get the controversy that Song of the South does. That's also much, much more racist. And that's the movie we're going to talk about today, called The Light in the Forest. This is Death by Disney. Welcome to Death by Disney, a series where I am watching and commenting and reviewing on all Disney films, and it's available on YouTube and also wherever you get your podcasts. So check it out. I have done chronologically from the first film in 1937, Snow White, and I've skipped around and I've done films from the 70s, but now I'm back to doing it chronologically, and I'm in the year 1958. And a movie came out starring Fess Parker, who is better known as Davy Crockett, and Jessica Tandy, called The Light in the Forest. And this movie is based on a 1953 novel of the same name. And I'm not going to tell you who it's by. You can go and look it up because this is an atrocious piece of fiction. And maybe the novel is more palatable, but the Disney version is atrocious. So, what happens is, I'll tell you the details of the plot. The story begins where the white settlers, so the British, are negotiating with a tribe they call the Delaware. And they, the Delaware, call themselves Lenape. And the Lenape lived in the Delaware and Pennsylvania area. And after the Revolutionary War, they were exiled to Canada and Wisconsin and Iowa. So basically, they were ethnically cleansed in the literal definition of the word. So this particular story is set in the difficult time period for them when white settlers are encroaching on their land. So what happens is white settlers encroach on somebody's land, there's a conflict, and people get killed, people get kidnapped on both sides. And the whites believe that this conflict is happening because the natives are savage and they need to be conquered because white culture is so fundamentally superior. So what happens in the story is they're going to have a treaty, a peace treaty between the whites and the Lenape. I'm not going to use the Delaware name because that's not actually their name. That's the name of a European guy, so it's really weird to call a group of people by the surname of a European guy that doesn't really have any connection. Although they're not called that name because of the European guy. Well, I mean, indirectly. They named a river after the European guy, and they lived around the river, so they called them after the European guy. Kind of convoluted, but anyway. So they're having this peace treaty, and the British general, who is played by a French actor who's trying to do a Scottish accent, which is a choice. um, he says to the Lenape that we will have peace, but every white person you have took captive needs to be returned. And you might think, well, that's okay because those people clearly have been kidnapped. But you have to realize that some of those people they had, so some of those people had been living in this community since they were babies. So basically, culturally, they are Lenape. And so this decision, so the chief of the tribe basically says, yes, we are going to accept this peace treaty, and we're going to give away the white people that have been assimilated by us. And this causes some conflict in the community, and they show this meeting of the tribe, and basically the younger people say, if the whites who want to go back can go back, but the people who don't want to go back, they should be able to stay, which is pretty logical. And this just shows like this really like black and white thinking is the problem with this movie. So basically the movie is positing that being white is the best, and being Indian is like, you know, maybe noble, but it's completely old fashioned and doesn't have a future, right? So the conflict of the movie happens because the chief's son, True Son, which is a great name if you only have one son, True Son is one of these people who have been adopted from an early age, and he considers himself Lenape, and he is forced to go back to his white family. And it's really weird because they are like 100% sure it's the same person, even though he's almost an adult. And I think it might be a different person. That's my reading of it. Because when he gets back to his white family, he doesn't speak English, or at least they automatically assume that he can speak English, right? So they start speaking English to him, and the mom has no warmth when her son has returned back. She doesn't really hug him. She says basically like, you need to say your name. You're not leaving this room until you say your name. Which is like, she is treating him like a petulant child who has, you know, is refusing to do some chore or something. But it's not a chore that he's refusing to do. 80-90% of his life has been living in this culture, and you're just saying, oh, you have to throw that away now because you're going to live in the white society. Which, yeah, probably those two ideas are incompatible at that time. But the problem with this situation in this area of North America is that it was so black or white. And in other areas, like in South America, they didn't have, I mean, I'm sure they had racism, but there are still thriving native communities in South America. Not to say that there aren't native communities in North America, but to say that they're all thriving would be a understatement. Like in Ecuador, I think 80% of the population are indigenous. So that's not true in North America. And the reason it's not true is because you had this like, the white culture was saying we are automatically superior. And the Spanish, I don't even know why it's different, honestly, but it's different, and you can tell from the historical results. So that's not necessarily why this movie is so racist, though, because it is from 1958, so you do expect some racist stereotypes, and the movie is actually not that hostile to native culture when we're talking about like actual interactions with native people before the main conflict of the movie happens. It's much less racist in that regard than Peter Pan is, because the Indians in that movie, and I'm using the word Indians because that's what they use, they can't like speak normally. They're like a completely different color, like really bright red, except for the Indian princess who is very white, surprisingly. So really weird. So here's where it gets super, super racist. So as I said, True Son gets kind of kidnapped back into his white family, and there is a little bit of an adjustment period, and he is slowly being like reintegrated into white society. And some of his friends come and visit him, and one friend of his gets shot and killed by this white settler. We'll talk more about him in a moment. But then True Son and his cousin, they run back to the Lenape, and the Lenape are like, yep, that's it, we're gonna go to war. And I didn't watch the movie, the rest of the movie that I'm telling you about. I'm giving you a synopsis because it's just a piece of trash, basically. It made me so angry. So I'm telling you what happens so you know why I stopped watching it. So the white guy who kills the friend of True Son is this guy named Wiley. And he's not based on anyone real, historical, but the events they talk about really happened. So he's the leader of a vigilante group called the Parsons, and the Parsons were going around murdering Indians because they were at war with the Indians. So Indians were murdering white settlers and Parsons were murdering Indians, and it was a war. So you can maybe kind of excuse that. But what happened is there was a group of Indians who weren't involved in this conflict, and they asked for asylum or like sanctuary from the governor of Pennsylvania. I think it was Penn at the time, but I'm not sure. So they asked for sanctuary from him, and he's like, yeah, okay. And so he put them in protective custody, I think in like a prison somewhere, or like a fort prison kind of deal. So they're there. They have nothing to do with this conflict that the Parsons are involved in with the other groups. So the Parsons like, they're Indians too, we're gonna kill them. And they kill them. They massacre them. It's a war crime, basically, but who cares, because it's before the concept of war crimes, and it's an Indian, so it doesn't really matter in the long run because white culture is so superior. That's not the racist part, because the movie makes this guy into a villain. He is a villain in the movie, which is great, realistic, right? But at the end, there's this conflict that is started by that guy shooting True Son's friend. The Lenape want to get revenge because, you know, violence is a cycle and it never ends. So they decide that they're going to scalp 20 white people. And they do that and they can't get the number up. So there's some children, so they're going to do it to some children. And True Son's like, whoa, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't do it with the kids, which is reasonable. And he goes back to the whites and he says, hey, they're going to try and kill these kids. And then he kind of stops that conflict. And the very end of the movie, True Son shakes the hand of the guy who is responsible for this war crime. And that's it. The movie ends. The guy who massacred about 40 innocent people, forgiven. It's okay because he's helped the white character understand the greatness of being white. It's so very frustrating because what happens, this movie is set in 1760, and so 1776, so in about 20 years the Americans are going to win the revolution, and then they're going to systematically expel native tribes westward. And so these Lenape people who've been living in this area for generations get scattered everywhere. Yeah, genocide, ethnic cleansing, and we're supposed to say that's good because whiteness is the best. And the irritating part about the movie is that they're not portraying the Indians as necessarily savage, right? I mean, they get savage towards the end because revenge, but they're not like going out and, well, okay, let me rephrase that. They do actually do that. So they have this weird mixture of like, yes, they're noble, they're savage. We need to respect the museum artifact that is this culture, but it's the past. And white culture is the future in this country. And, but you know, they do this thing where, uh, so it's a really confusing narrative because they want to be sympathetic towards the Lenape, but they also want to excuse the fact that there's been this genocide against them and everybody who they represent, so all the native peoples of North America. And it doesn't work because, so for example, True Son and his cousin Half Minute, I think his name is, great names by the way, are talking about what True Son is going to do on the way back. And True Son says he is going to commit suicide, which, I mean, pretty drastic step, but you can understand that if his entire world had been taken away from him, he would react that way. But his cousin is like super happy when this happens. He's like excited, yeah, you're gonna commit suicide, which doesn't seem like a thing that they would do. And then their conversations are like really, really bloodthirsty, and there's no explanation for why they are so violent towards this group of people. The movie and the thinking at the time is just like, these people are so violent, and the white people didn't do anything to make that happen. We forget that people are violent. It doesn't matter what culture you are, and if somebody comes into your home and starts to, you know, like, let's say you've been hunting in one area all of your life, and then suddenly there's a farm there and the animals are gone. What are you going to do? I mean, I wouldn't condone murder, but that's the dilemmas that these people had. And it's just so bad because it's just so morally confusing because they need to show that the white people are the future and they're more morally justifiable in their behaviors, even if sometimes it's to excess. And the reason it's to excess is because the other side provoked them. It's kind of like saying if a woman is walking down the street with a short skirt that she deserves it, basically. So that's why this movie is the most racist I've ever seen of a Disney film. And the maybe the other thing to talk about, which is really weird, is Song of the South is actually a good movie. It's completely racist, but it's a good movie. And this movie is really boring. It's not good. I think originally the cinematography was good, but I couldn't find like a version that hadn't been uploaded and, you know, downloaded a bunch of times. So I think that there are beautiful shots of nature in the film, but it looks really, really muddy, and it's like the Ridley Scott Napoleon movie, but not on purpose. So I think cinematographically it was really good, but the message is bad and the movie's kind of boring. So I'm going to give this a 0 out of 10. What did you think about The Light in the Forest? Let me know. If you like what I do, please subscribe and leave a comment. Thank you. Bye-bye.